All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October 18th meeting of the MCE Board of Directors. First thing that we need is a roll call. I hope Darlene is there. Whoops, that was the one important person we were missing. Hey, Darlene.
Coming right up.
Yeah, she is. She's in Concord. Yeah.
Good evening. Athos. Bailey.
Here.
Pearson.
Here.
Blackwell. Butt.
Here.
Carlston.
Here.
Kohler.
Here.
Cruz. Glover. Green.
Here.
Harrop.
I'm here.
Higgins. Benales. Fideli. McCaskill. McCullough.
Uh-oh.
McEntee.
I think we've got some
Perkins.
challenges here.
Russell. Schroeder. Patterson.
Here.
Sears.
Here. Our mics are out, so.
Toms. Tatson.
Here.
Trotter. Wagon Connect. Wellner. Withy.
Here.
So, can you hear me in Concord at all?
I'm going to reset them.
Wait, if your mic works.
We're too short of quorum.
Yeah, hold on.
3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
So that will
So it looks like we're going to wait. We need to wait until we get a couple more folks joining before we can begin.
No, we don't have microphones, so.
I'm not sure they can even hear you when you said that.
I'm communicating to them by text.
Are you letting them know? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah.
Ooh,
That's because you're the
looking
boss. That's
good.
probably
All right,
good.
can you hear me now in Concord?
Hello?
Hello,
Yeah,
can you
we
hear
you
me?
just fine.
Oh, good.
All right, it looks like we're back in action. And do we have a quorum, Darlene?
We don't, Kate. We need 2 more folks before we have quorum.
We have, John Wellner has joined us, so that's 1.
And do I see Bob McCaskill there as well?
Yeah,
We have a quorum.
all right. He was here before. Okay. It was probably when the mics went down. All right, so we're good, yes? All right, so,
We are.
great. Board announcements from anyone? Okay, hearing none. Public open time. Do you have public there in Concord who would like to speak?
We have no members of the public today.
Okie dokie, excellent. All right, Dawn, we're on number 4, report from the Chief Executive Officer.
Great. I have just a couple of items. I wanted to remind folks to state your name when you speak if you can and use the mic so that you can be heard in both locations. And then if you can remember to turn off your mic when you're done speaking, that'll minimize the feedback. And wanted to just give thanks to folks for all the participation in a whole bunch of September events. It was a really busy month, and we wanted to thank board members who were able to attend the Southern California Central Valley tour of the Wind Project, Voyager 2, in August. That was a big success, and we really appreciated the board members that were able to participate in that. Also, the CalCCA board retreat that happened in Pacific Grove in early September. We had some board members participating there, and it was great to have a lot of CCAs together in one place for that. The Global Climate Action Summit occurred on September 12th through 14th, and we had some participation there as well. The Supplier Diversity en banc was held in Richmond on October 4th. Big thanks to our Vice Chair, Tom Butt, for kicking that off for us. It was a statewide event with about 300 folks talking about supplier diversity in the energy sector. And then the MCE board retreat. We saw almost all of you there. It was, I think, our best retreat ever. That's the feedback I've been getting from folks. And, I wanted to say a little bit about, the great input that we got at that event. It was an opportunity to really hear a lot from board members about objectives for the next year. And, I think just to summarize, some of the good input that we got was the great feedback on our big picture vision. I think that this retreat was more interactive than usual, and we got a lot of good input on how, what are the things we want to focus on in the next year. We talked about kind of getting more big picture, getting out of the weeds a bit in our board meetings and talking more about big picture policy issues. We talked about kind of harnessing the power of elected officials, both within our jurisdiction and beyond, as we're dealing with statewide regulatory and legislative issues. And we were able to take some of these concepts into the executive committee meeting, which happened last week, and actually take some action. So there are a couple of items on the agenda tonight that have really come out of that input, kind of helping MCE transition to a little bit more using our board time, the really valuable time that we have with all of you, to focus on big picture policy issues and getting out of the weeds a bit. So more on that later in the agenda, but I just wanted to thank folks for participating in the board retreat. And then the next announcement I have is I just wanted to give folks an update on the PCIA, the Power Charge Indifference Adjustment. I'm sure you all remember that great acronym. This is an issue that we've been working with the CPUC on for many, many years. There was a proceeding over the last year that was pretty intensively looking at making adjustments to the methodology. A final decision just came out last Thursday. So we have some results on the initial scope of this track of the PCIA proceeding. There is a track 2 that is now starting, so there will be some more adjustments made next year. But the outcome that came out last Thursday wasn't great. It was unfortunately what we were expecting, though. So we're kind of prepared to deal with the outcome, but it was very favorable to the investor-owned utilities and ended up compensating them for some costs which we believe are avoidable costs, and that's really what the statute is requiring. So we're concerned that the final decision doesn't align with the statute, and so there may be some follow-up on this proposed decision or on this final decision. And we'll keep you posted on that. There will also certainly be activity involved in the Phase 2 proceeding of the PCIA, and we'll keep you posted on that too. Does anyone have questions about that before I move on?
So can you clarify?
Elizabeth Patterson, can you clarify the impacts to the customer?
Well, we don't have details on the exact impacts yet. What we do know is that the formula that's being used for the PCIA is now going to include some costs that weren't included before, including utility-owned generation, for example, that prior to this decision would have been phased out after a 10-year cost recovery period for the IOUs. That's one example of a cost that will continue to remain in the PCIA longer, and that will have some upward pressure on the PCIA. The proposed decision is likely to result in about a 2 to 3% increase overall in the PCIA. But the actual application of the PCIA isn't going to be final until the ERA proceeding is complete later this year. So we'll have more information on it later at the end of the year. We won't have final numbers until December 31st, and we will begin our rate-setting process then in January after we have final numbers.
So thanks for that. The other part is that are they going to be allowed to build new facilities or contract for new facilities, and then we get to pay for that?
Yeah, that typically happens through the cost allocation mechanism, or CAM, and that has been happening for years, leading up to now, and we expect to see that continue. Facilities that they build that they do not put into the cost allocation mechanism could be put into the PCIA, but would only impact customers that haven't already departed from the IOUs. So our customers that have already departed will only be paying for costs that were incurred up until the year that they departed.
And then this is Don Tatson from Lafayette. Any sense of whether we, as a relatively established CCA, will be affected differently from all the startup CCAs around the state?
Yeah, we will be affected differently in a couple of different ways. I think that because we launched at a time when power supply costs were higher, we have some legacy costs in our portfolio that we do not get to share cost recovery with PG&E for those legacy costs. And that was an unfortunate decision made by the CPUC that they weren't willing to look at that issue. They consider that to be out of scope. So we are impacted by that. I think, on the flip side, we've had a lot more operational experience. We have a very diverse portfolio. We've achieved a credit rating, and we've built up a lot of capacity to continue to operate. And we also have experience dealing with, different cost structures. We've actually seen the PCIA go up 100% in the past few years ago. And so we've developed, I think, some good strategies for weathering that type of impact. And I think we'll be able to weather this one too. Any questions in San Rafael?
No, we're good, Don. Thank you. I'm not seeing any. Thank you.
Great. And then I wanted to let folks know that on your dais there is a report from CalCCA. That's the Q3 CalCCA update. And it's a pretty lengthy document, so we've just given you the first page overview, and we'll be sharing a link to the full document tomorrow in case you're interested in reading the whole thing. I've got one copy here, which I'm going to pass around in case people want to glance through it. And it's just an interesting document. Oh, we've got two copies, so I can pass them around. This just gives you a sense of what's happening across the state in the CCA world, so wanted to let you know about that. And then my very last announcement is that the MCE holiday party will be held on Friday, December 7th at the Napa Valley Marriott Hotel. You should have received your invitation by now. Please let Darlene know if you haven't. And included in the invitation, or separate, it might have been a separate link was sent to you for a block of discounted rooms specifically for MCE party guests. I think Darlene did a great job of negotiating a good rate at this hotel, so a very good one. So we'd love to have all of you come to the holiday party. You're not required to stay for the night, but you're welcome to. And to be eligible for the group rate, you need to make your reservation on or before November 28th. So, and that's something you'll need to do on your own if you want to take advantage of that group rate. And that's it for my report, unless there are any questions.
Great. Thanks very much, Dawn. I think those comments were really helpful and set the stage for some of our agenda items tonight. Before we go on any further, I want to extend my apologies to Paul Fideli, our good alternate from El Cerrito, who I referred to with the wrong name a few minutes ago, suggesting he was from Tiburon, and I'm sure he doesn't want to be on this side of the bay. All right. So we're moving on to the consent calendar, and I know that Barbara Kohler has a couple of questions not requiring anything to be pulled, I don't think, but some general questions. Barbara, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Should I ask them one by one? Yeah, just go ahead. So on C3, the approved contracts update, I thought I understood, but I may have misunderstood that we were getting out of further contracts with Shell Energy. Yet I see we have something for $500,000 for 5 months. So did I misunderstand that, or are we just trying to limit our exposure with Shell Energy?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. So And just as a reminder for those of you that weren't on the board during our launch, we initially launched MCE with a 5-year contract with Shell Energy North America after a competitive bidding process. And that contract, there was discussion about allowing that contract to come to an end. It was tied to a lockbox arrangement that we were looking forward to shifting away from at the conclusion of that contract to have some financial benefits. And we were also looking at really diversifying our portfolio. And that contract with Shell did come to an end about a year and a half ago. And since that time, since launching, we've got a lot of contracts in our portfolio. And so there was a period of time where we didn't have any contracts in our portfolio from Shell Energy North America. But after some discussion with our technical committee and our contracts committee, we determined that it really didn't make sense to have any counterparty kept off of the list for future purchases. And they did bid into a subsequent solicitation and were selected for this particular product. Just as a reminder, we have about 40 different suppliers. They do have a supply in California, and so there will be times where we'll be buying power from them, most likely from time to time, if they have competitive products that are meeting our needs for renewable or resource adequacy.
Thank you for that clarification.
Or conventional, I should add. That's another product that they offer.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I was afraid to touch it. So again, this is Barbara Kohler from Fairfax. So on C5, the conflict of interest code, I think all of that's good. But one of the things I'm wondering is, have we ever considered having an ethics officer rather than have the CEO receive all these forms? Typically in our towns and cities, it's often our town clerk. And it seems like now that we've grown so much, it might be a good consideration. That way the ethics officer could review the forms as well and provide some guidance as needed. So is that something we've considered?
I'm sorry, Director Kohler, are you referring to C5? C5, the conflict of interest code. Okay.
5.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah,
It's basically because you're talking about designated filers. So I'm bringing up the concept of, typically you have in organizations an ethics officer that receives those forms and reviews those forms. So it seems like maybe we've grown so much it might be time to consider that. And it's often somebody that's like the clerk of the boards or things like that.
Yeah, this is Beth Kelly, General Counsel. So the way that we run our Form 700s is those are collected through Darlene, and for the board members, those are collected by your different cities and towns. They're aggregated to us. Then we perform legal review on that and review each of those for any potential conflicts of interest. We aggregate those. We bring those to Dawn as our CEO. If it relates to a board member, it's brought to Dawn as our CEO for her to have a conversation with each of those individuals. And then for staff matters, then we just bring those to the individual staff. So we don't have a formal ethics officer, but that's our process.
And Darlene is the clerk of the board.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My last question is on the third agreement with Open Energy Efficiency. The contract looks good. And again, maybe I've misunderstood, but I thought that all our energy efficiency contracts work would be paid out of the monies we get from the CPUC to run the energy efficiency program. And I noticed that this was talking about coming out of our operations budget with maybe just a small amount coming from the energy efficiency monies that we get allocated through CPUC. So I'm wondering if perhaps, again, it's a misunderstanding on my part.
No, that's a great question, Director Kohler, and you're raising a good point. I think that what I can add to the information that you've seen in the staff report is just that this is a contract that is likely to extend out past the next few months. The energy efficiency dollars are likely to be covering the bulk of these costs. And because we typically pay dues and subscriptions out of the operating budget, we may do some initial payments out of that fund, but we're likely to be reimbursing most of this through the energy efficiency budget. And this is actually something that staff have been spending a lot of time on this week, just fine-tuning the source of funds for this contract. And I can assure you that we'll be using, well, the majority of it will be coming from our energy efficiency funds, if not all of it.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director Culler, for those questions. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on the consent calendar? Yeah, Ford.
Ford, Green, San Anselmo. First is the July 19 minutes, item 7. It's an accuracy issue. It says in the box, motion carried by unanimous roll call vote. And then in parentheses, it says noes, Director Storer. So it's just unanimous and a no are mutually exclusive. And that should be cleaned up. So that's not a big deal. Then also I have a question about the conflict of interest code. The way it's structured has numerical categories that correspond to different obligations. And my concern about it is whether or not it's just it's sort of too much minutia, and whether or not in the application that might cause some sort of problem. And so what I'd like is an explanation about why that approach is taken instead of just enumerating what the requirements are and apply them to everybody.
Beth, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. So it's my understanding that the question is, why do we have disclosure category numbers rather than it listed out for each position? Is that correct?
It's the numbers. When you look at it, you have 1, 2, 3 applying to almost everybody. And I think there are 3 different employment categories that you apply only a single one to, and it just seems kind of overly complicated. And what's the reasoning behind it?
The reasoning is that it's a bit of a vestige from our prior iterations of the form. So we're happy to make larger revisions. We had some revisions performed by external counsel, and it just sort of maintained the same structure as before. What we can look at for next year's conflict of interest code is to consolidate disclosure categories 1 and 2. But there would still be some individuals that only have to report out on certain designated categories. It is a little bit complicated. The way that we deal with that internally is staff receives an email tailored to the set of obligations that they have, so that they know what they need, what each staff member needs to report out on. Yeah. So does that answer your question, Director Green?
Sorry, I forgot to push my button in. So you're satisfied that in its application, you're comfortable, and you're not going to run into trouble downstream where you inadvertently apply the wrong category to the wrong position?
No, I feel comfortable with the procedures we have in place.
Okay.
Great. All right. Any other questions or comments on consent? All right. Hearing and seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Move to adopt?
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Any opposition? All right. Let's move on to item 6 on our agenda, which is a resolution authorizing a delegation of authority by the CEO. Dawn or Beth, who wants to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to tee up that item, and maybe next time we need to go a little slower with the motions. I think we had people here that wanted to jump in, so just a reminder. and could we get the, who was the maker of that last motion?
That was me, Ford Green.
Okay, and you got the second? Okay, we also didn't get the second? Here? Oh, great, it was Director Brisson. Great. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to introduce item 6, and then Beth may have some more to add. This resolution is delegating authority by the CEO to allow certain staff that are called out specifically in the resolution to approve certain purchases that the agency is making on a routine basis. And so this is one of the resolutions that really came out of the discussion that we had leading up to the retreat in XCOM, the discussion we had in the retreat, and the subsequent executive committee meeting where we talked about kind of simplifying some of our processes as we've grown to be a bigger agency. So, when we were a smaller agency, it made sense for the CEO to have the authority to do approvals of all purchases within the confines of what's been delegated to the CEO. But as we've grown, there are a range of things that we need to enter into contracts for and costs that need to be approved. And so this resolution simply allows for the CEO to delegate authority to either the Chief Operating Officer or COO or to one of our director-level staff. We have about 5 director-level staff. So our director-level staff or our COO would be able to have delegated authority for specific purchases. Welcome, Director Trotter. We have Director Trotter from Town of Moraga joining us. This assignment of delegating authority would be done in writing, and it would be, with specific parameters. I want to clarify, because it might be confusing in your packet, there are 3 resolutions, but only one of them is the resolution we're voting on tonight. The other 2 are just for reference to kind of remind everyone what the current delegation of authority is. And the resolution you're voting on tonight is simply to give me the authority to assign that authority for specific reasons in specific instances to either the COO or a director-level staff person. And a couple of examples of that might be, if I'm going to be out of town, or if we need to have some redundancy on approving specific contracts, I might delegate authority to Vicken, our COO. Our internal operations director, Sarah S.G. Smith, manages a lot of our contracts with custodial services, landscapers, that sort of thing. And so delegating authority to her up to a certain limit on executing those types of purchasing contracts would create some efficiencies at MCE. So that's the rationale. And Beth, do you want to add anything to that before we take questions? No. Okay, great. Are there any questions?
I have a question. So I'm more or less in support of it. I would think it would be useful to have a monthly list of the purchasing agreements and contracts. Is that the intent?
We actually do already have a list of purchases that are made that go in the consent calendar for power supply. We do not currently provide a list of every purchase. That would be pretty lengthy and might go in the opposite direction of creating efficiency. But we do that for our power supply larger purchases.
Okay, and so would it be, because I don't see it in this packet, is it in this packet?
Yeah, it's on the consent calendar. So if you look at item C3, that's the approved contracts update.
Okay, thanks.
And this is Don Tatson. So I inferred from what you said that while the board has granted purchasing power to you for up to $100,000, you might not grant that same $100,000 to everybody. So there'd be some structure. It would vary by person.
No, thank you so much for clarifying that. Absolutely no. It would be for a specific amount and for a specific purpose.
Okay. Rupert.
We may need a mic
Good evening.
on.
It's Rupert Russell from Town of Ross. I've often commented on the extent of your authority in the past and whether it's appropriate or not, or at least at the appropriate level. And I'm just wondering whether, since you're now looking at delegating your own authority, does the 100,000 figure at the moment make sense? Are there many contracts that are more than 100,000? I believe that there are. And should you be revisiting that with respect to yourself? By the way, one other minor thing, you might want to clean up the typo in the caption on the resolution, that the word procurement, you missed out the E after the R, but that's non-substantive. But the substantive issue is the 100,000. Since we're looking at this in the round as to who should have authority for what, is the 100,000 really appropriate given the size of the contracts that you're currently dealing with?
Thanks for the question, and also thank you for catching that typo. We'll make sure to clean that up before we get that final version posted. It just moves forward. At this time, the 100,000 is certainly adequate. It covers the bulk of the monthly purchases. I think we could revisit the figure in the future. You'll see some items on the consent calendar for tonight, for example, that were above that 100,000 mark, and so those do need to go either to the executive committee, technical committee, or the board. So at this time, I think we're all right with that $100,000 cap, but that's certainly something we can bring back to the board if we find that it's creating inefficiencies in the future.
Any other questions on this item? Yeah, Ford.
Ford Green. So the three resolutions that you've provided, they're all to be read together, right?
Yeah, the first resolution really is kind of referencing the other two. The other two are already in effect.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
So this is Don Tatson. I'll move we adopt Resolution 2018-08, amended to fix the spelling.
Second.
Great. All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? All right, very good. That's approved. Thank you. All right, next on our agenda is an ordinance establishing an alternative claims procedure. Dawn or Beth, one of you want to discuss this item?
Yeah, certainly. So this is an alternate claims procedure, which I think a lot of your cities, towns, and counties already have in place. This is a mechanism that provides that to the extent that any individual wants to bring suit against MCE, they bring that to MCE first, and they exhaust administrative remedies, which basically means that before something gets filed in court, we can work with that entity to hopefully prevent that from becoming a full-fledged lawsuit and resolve things more amicably and more efficiently. So this is, again, pretty consistent with how most of your cities and towns do this, but I'm happy to entertain any questions on it.
Any questions for Beth?
Are there any suits? Oops, sorry.
Rupert, go for it. Yep.
Sorry, it's Rupert Russell again from Town of Ross. Are there many suits against MC?
No.
And we're knocking on wood while we're answering that question. Yeah? Yeah, Ford?
Many's a little bit vague. Are there any?
No.
Here we go.
So far, so
There has never
good.
been a suit filed against
Yeah,
MCE.
we have never been sued.
I'm knocking on wood still. Yeah,
I'm
no?
knocking on wood as well.
So we're so far, so good. All right. Any other questions or comments on this item? All right. Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve it. Ford Green from San Anselmo.
Do I have a second?
And because this is an ordinance, we actually have to read the full magic language that is in the staff report.
You want to have a first reading?
That's exactly right.
You want to have a first reading of the title, Beth? Is that what you want?
Yeah, let me bring up my staff report. Oh, thank you.
I need a second on the motion, though, before you read anything. Was there a second? Okay, there's a second by Andrew McCullough. And we need to take a vote before you read anything, Beth. Okay, so all in favor? You're going to have a first reading. Let's talk about your procedure first.
Yeah, so the proposal is to waive full reading, read by title only, and introduce for first reading ordinance 2018-02 of the Board of Directors of Marin Clean Energy establishing an alternative claims procedure pursuant to Government Code 935.
And this is Dave Trotter here in Concord. Typically, ordinances are subject to a roll call vote. It's pretty standard. Okay.
And I'm trying to get to the vote because I want to have the vote before we actually read the title. So thanks for that, Dave. And Darlene, if you could do a roll call vote, that would be great.
Yes. Belvedere,
Yes.
Benicia,
Yes.
Concord,
Yes.
City of Concord,
Yes.
unincorporated Contra Costa County, Corte Madera,
Yes.
Danville, City of El Cerrito,
Yes.
Fairfax,
Yes.
Lafayette,
Yes.
Larkspur,
Yes.
County of Marin,
Yes?
Martinez, Mill Valley, Moraga,
Aye.
County of Napa and all cities, Novato, Oakley, Pinot,
Yes.
Pittsburgh, Richmond,
I think we need a mic on for that last vote.
That was Director Butt that said yes.
thank you, Ross,
Yes.
San Anselmo,
Yes.
San Pablo, City of San Rafael,
Yes.
San Ramon, Sausalito,
Yes.
Tiburon, microphone, please.
All right. Are we good? No Tiburon?
Not there. Thought he was there. Walnut Creek.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, very good. So now, Beth, would you read the title into the record?
The title is Ordinance Number 2018-02, an ordinance of the Board of Directors of Marin Clean Energy establishing an alternative claims procedure pursuant to Government Code Section 935.
Great, thanks very much. All right, let's move on to item 8, which is a resolution delegating authority to set compensation, tenure, and appointment conditions of employment to the Executive Committee and the Chief Executive Officer. Dawn, are you going to introduce this?
Yeah, I'll introduce this item, and this is just one more resolution where we're looking at a way that we can create some more efficiency and streamline our process at the board and committee level. So this resolution really aligns with input from the board and executive committee around simplification. As those of you on XCOM are aware, and also board members, we have spent a lot of time in the past on job descriptions, kind of in the weeds, talking about processes related to staff. And while that made a lot of sense when we had 3 or 4 staff, it's much different now with an organization of a little more than 60 staff. And in order to use the board's time on bigger picture issues. This was discussed in executive committee. We actually discussed it a little bit over the summer. The retreat provided some more input and thoughts around this type of thing. And then in the executive committee last week, it was recommended that we move forward with this resolution, which would delegate authority around staffing levels, creating job descriptions to the CEO, and so that we are not bringing those types of items on a regular basis to committees. However, there would be consultation happening, continuing to happen with the executive committee as needed to help weigh in on key decisions that we might make in the course of the year. So that's the overview. Happy to answer any questions.
So, Dawn, just one question and clarification. Any decisions made with respect to compensation would, of course, fit within the budget parameters that have been approved by the board, correct?
Thank you for clarifying that. That's a really important clarification, and absolutely, the staff don't have the authority to make decisions to go outside the bounds of the board-approved budget, and this absolutely would adhere to that mandate.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Ford.
Ford Green, what would your reporting obligations be with respect to decisions made? You said you qualified what you said by important staff or something like that, and so what would be the scope of what you would report with respect to these types of decisions?
So what I was referring to is that there may be times where we want to get input from the executive committee on things related to human resources. A good example is our most recent executive committee meeting. We had a discussion about benefits and got some really good input that wasn't required for staff to get input from the executive committee, but was very helpful nonetheless. I think that there may be other staffing related questions that we want to bring to XCOM, because that is part of the scope of what XCOM is for. And so we'd like to be able to continue to do that. As far as reporting, all of the detailed information about MCE staff, compensation levels, et cetera, are always available publicly when requested, but there isn't as far as we're aware, it's not common among public agencies to report out to their board on the number of staff or the job descriptions of staff. But that's something we'll certainly be discussing at XCOM at appropriate times.
Well, my concern just has to do with our supervision obligations and duties. And if we don't have enough information about the decisions that are being made, we can't discharge those duties. So that's the impetus of my inquiry.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we're bringing HR-related items to the executive committee, it'll be important for us to provide plenty of background. But again, the main overarching limitation on any type of additional hiring is really tied to the budget. And, when the budget is set at the beginning of every year, every fiscal year, there's a personnel category, and with that, we'll have detail outlined. What we've learned, though, is that, there are often adjustments throughout the course of the year as we have some positions may phase out. There may be a need for other positions to be added, not en masse, but because of the adjustments that happen throughout the course of the year, it hasn't been efficient to come to the committee and the board every time there are adjustments within the budget. But the budget is really, and the budget discussion is where we talk about those levels, and the board helps establish what are the dollars that we are comfortable allocating to that for the course of the year. Does that help answer your question?
Right. Any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing none here. Hearing none in Concord, I'd entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
I move to approve the 80%. I move to approve the resolution.
Second.
Aye. Any opposition? All right, that's approved. Very good. Thank you, everyone. And one more resolution, which is MC's commitment to complying with the land use authorities of its member communities. Dawn, do you want to tee this up for us? I know that Director Trotter will want to comment.
Would you like to tee it up, Director Trotter? Okay.
This is the culmination of a process that dates back almost a year now. Communication by myself on behalf of my Moraga colleague, Kimberly Corpus, concerned about issues of the exercise of eminent domain by MCE in member community jurisdictions where the governing board may not want that project to be there. And the original ask was to amend the JPA agreement to take out the exercise of the power of domain clause entirely, but that's not viable. That would require unanimity. And I never thought that was a particularly good idea. But through the executive committee process, we have massaged that issue, and I think I'm indebted to our chairman, Kate Sears, for working with me on the language of the proposed resolution, which I have in the executive committee referred to as a good neighbor policy. MCE should be a good neighbor to its member communities and should not be trying to exercise the power of eminent domain, which is in the JPA and which JPAs generally have, if the particular member jurisdiction does not want that project to be there. And so we should all try to be good neighbors. And this resolution is intended to state as a matter of board policy, at least the current board policy, that the operative clause in the resolution, which you can refer to in your packet, is the resolve clause, that the MCE, as a policy matter, MCE shall, as a general rule, not initiate or exercise its power of eminent domain within the jurisdiction of any community, MCE community member community, without the support and approval of the governing board of that MCE member, and that MCE shall otherwise comply with the land use entitlement and design review approval processes of the local jurisdiction in which any MCE projects or facilities are to be constructed. And the latter clause there simply is a articulation of what's already in the Joint Powers Authority in Section 2.7. So, again, I see it as something that has the blessing of the Executive Committee, and I'm willing to answer any questions, but I'm hoping that this is not particularly controversial. I think it's just sensible, and I ask that the full board approve this so that we can move on to other more important things.
Thank you, Director Trotter. Any questions from the board or comments? Not seeing any here. Would you like to make that motion, Director Trotter?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the Board of Directors of MCE approve the resolution in the form provided by staff affirming MCE's commitment to complying with, the MCE's commitment to complying with the land use authorities of its member communities.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? That's approved. Very good. Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone, for your attention and patience getting through these last 4 items. They really are, as Don indicated, intended to try to streamline our operations a bit. But now on to something that's a little more substantive, at least in terms of technical interest and membership interest, and that's moving on to item 10, which is our consideration of whether we should approve the County of Solano as a member of MCE. And who wants to talk about this one, Dawn? I'm looking at Lindsay. She wants to talk.
Yeah, we're going to hear from Alex DeGiorgio from our team, and then we're going to also hear from Kirby Dussel on this item. And I'll just say a little bit, this has been in the works for quite a while. Many of you have heard us talking about the discussions with the County of Solano. We touched on it at the retreat, but there's been some discussion going on in the background, and it has resulted in a request from the County of Solano to join as a member of MCE. And just as a reminder, before I turn it over to Kirby and Alex, because some of you were not part of the board last time we did this, just as a reminder, the process that we typically go through is if we get a request from a new community to join MCE, we look at a couple of things. We have a policy that we follow, and before adding a new community, we do a study, an analysis, to determine if the adding the community will have positive impacts on a range of areas. And Kirby Dussel and the PEA team assisted MCE by completing that analysis, and so Kirby's going to report on the results of that analysis. And Alex is going to tell you a little bit about the actions of the community. He's been working closely with the County of Solano and is going to talk to you about a little bit, give you a bit of an overview about that community and the steps that they've taken. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Are you first or Alex? So
right, it looks like...
We need to pull up some slides, I think.
All right, while the slides are coming up, I'll go ahead and just reiterate, I think, one of the items that Don just mentioned. Your board has adopted a policy for considering new members as part of its organization. And one of the processes that is laid out in that particular policy is the completion of an analysis that is intended to identify a number of items, three of which are listed here on slide number 2. So if we can go ahead and move down to that. These items, actually one up. Thank you. These items that are listed here amongst the bullets are really the key items that were considered as part of the technical analysis that we undertook, and you can see what they are here. In particular, we're looking for positive financial impacts to the organization that would result from adding this new member, an acceleration of greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and an increase in overall renewable energy content for MCE at large in the state as well. And so those items were considered as part of the process that we undertook, and we'll get into those details in just a little bit. But I think Alex is going to tell you a bit more about Solano County.
This lectern was so lonely up here.
I don't know if the camera will catch you. Do you know?
Good evening, members of the board. So I know it's late, so I won't belabor this too much. I just wanted to give some quick background on Solano County.
Alex, are you speaking into the microphone to the best of your ability?
Yes, can you hear me?
Not very well.
If it's not working, I'm happy to take
That's better. All right, thanks very much.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah, now it's good.
Oh, great. So the majority of the population of Solano County is concentrated in the cities. So since this decision is only going to affect the unincorporated jurisdiction, the population is on the smaller side. Although, as Kirby will explain in more detail, the load is maybe a little bit larger than you might expect from a population of this size. So the population countywide is upwards of 400,000 people, but in the unincorporated areas, it's a little bit less than 20,000 people. It's kind of the reverse of the way Contra Costa County has its population apportioned. So if the unincorporated area was its own city, it would basically be tied with Dixon for the second smallest city in the county. These next three bullets, I think, are really important because I know there's the perception that community choice aggregation is primarily something for wealthy coastal communities. I guess I would say it's a misperception. And these three bullets indicate, just how off that misperception is. the Cal Enviro Screen is a online tool that allows people to view parts of the state in California and see what their levels are in terms of vulnerability to the impact of climate change, environmental injustice, as well as income distribution and things of that sort. And there are several places in Solano County and also in MCE's existing service area that fall into the disadvantaged category. In addition to that, the land area of Solano County is about 900, a little bit more than 900 square miles. 675 of that is designated as rural land area. And then the Atlantic in 2014 did an analysis on the most racially diverse counties in the country. And Solano County was 5th among all of the counties in the entire United States, among the most racially diverse. I'm really glad that Benicia Mayor Patterson is here, because if there are any other hard questions about Solano County, I'm probably going to defer them to her. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Just to talk for a moment about the timeline and the county's decision-making process and MCE's relationship with the county. As you all know, MCE's inclusion policy right now is limited to jurisdictions that are within the counties where we're already providing service. The city of Benicia first voted to join MCE in 2014, along the same time as unincorporated Napa County, San Pablo, and El Cerrito. And you can see Benicia's here, right on the map. Those jurisdictions enrolled the following year in 2015, and it was around that time and then in the years following that our staff received inquiries from advocates and members of the community in Solano County asking more about how they can have more renewable energy options. Our experience has been that the more people learn about this, the more interested they become. There was particular interest in the areas around Vallejo. And then this year, in May, staff reached out to us in earnest, in part because of CPUC Resolution E4907, which decided that jurisdictions that wanted to form or join CCA programs wouldn't be able to enroll until 2020. That is if they complete the process by the end of this calendar year. So we helped, the county invited MCE staff to convene a public workshop so that the community members there could get all their questions answered about this. The president of the Farm Bureau and other folks attended it and asked many hard questions. And then in September, the Board of Supervisors voted, and it was a unanimous vote to join MCE. And now I think I'll turn over the details of the technical analysis to Kirby, and if there are any other questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them afterwards.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. So continuing on with the analysis that was performed, I think it's always best to start with just a bit of a reminder of where we are now in terms of the customer base, annual sales, and the like. And if we can go on to the next slide, that would be super. You'll see here that MCE's current customer base is about 475,000 accounts. Those accounts consume about 5.3 million megawatt hours annually. Peak demand is now over 1,000 megawatts, which makes it amongst the largest operating CCAs. So I think it's actually the largest and may ultimately get passed by others that are forming now, particularly down in Southern California, but that's still very big. Our renewable energy content goals were recently reestablished per discussions and approval of the technical committee to 60% for the period of time between 2019 and 2022, I believe. And our carbon-free content was also escalated to 90% starting in 2019 and moving quickly to 100% in 2022, of course staying at 100% thereafter as well. Annual revenues are now also at around $370 million a year. So adding Solano County to the mix would clearly increase things a little bit across the board. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the Solano County customer base and annual energy uses amongst the different rate classifications within the county. So you can see here The typical rate classifications that are referenced within the utility industry, starting at the top with residential, moving through the various commercial classifications, on down towards the bottom with agriculture and pumping loads, and then at the very bottom, street lighting. And so you'll see here that Solano County has various accounts within each one of these classifications, starting at the top with the residential classification. There's almost 8,000 accounts there, so that's about 72% of the total. Small commercial accounts as well as agricultural accounts make up about 12% respectively. And then you can see the other classifications, including the various commercial designations as well as street lighting, that make up the balance of Solano County's accounts for a total approximating 11,000. Again, amongst those accounts, we've got annual energy consumption that approximates about 187,000 megawatt hours per year. And I think it's noteworthy when you look over to the rightmost column, you can see the average per customer energy use on an annualized basis. And if you track down to the bottom, that 1,422 kilowatt hour metric is actually over 50% higher than the average within MCE's current customer base. So energy usage occurs more intensively within Solano County than it does amongst MCE's existing customers. And so I guess that's a fun fact, if nothing else. Moving on to the next slide. Typically, when we break out accounts by rate classification, the numbers as you see them in terms of the percentages, when we look at, say, residential customer composition as a proportion of the whole and look at that on an account total basis, it doesn't necessarily equate to the energy usage that occurs on a proportionate base within that same rate classification. And this is no different here. So on the last slide, you saw over 70% of Solano County's accounts fall into the residential classification, but those same accounts only account for 38% of the total energy use. So this is a pretty common relationship. Agriculture and pumping usage, however, is pretty intensive within Solano County, 12% on an account basis, but 27% of total usage. So they do use energy rather intensively in that particular customer group. And then you can see here how the other rate classifications round out total energy use on a proportionate basis within the county. We can go ahead and move to the next slide. So some of the key assumptions that were used in the analysis are laid out here on this particular slide. And right at the top, I think, is one that's particularly important. Service was going to start in the analysis in April 2020. And as Alex mentioned, there is a resolution in place that essentially precludes CCAs from launching more quickly than that. And in fact, this launch date, a 2020 launch date, would require submittal of an amended implementation plan within the 2018 calendar year in order to achieve a 2020 launch. So April, why April? Well, it does a couple of things. One, it's a nice, clean alignment with MCE's fiscal year, but that's not really the main reason. The main reason is enrolling customers in April gets those customers on board before the summer season when summer rates take effect, which is particularly advantageous to MCE in terms of the financial impacts. So that's one of the key reasons for the April launch. 90% customer participation was assumed, so 90% participation, that's the same as a 10% opt-out. And that was definitely taken into consideration in terms of the financial outcomes that were projected here. All of the revenues that were projected in the analysis were based on MCE's current rates. So there is a little bit of a temporal disconnect here in terms of where we are now and when this community would be coming online if the April 2020 date holds. Lots will change between now and then, but it's still important to kind of pick a point of reference. And so that's what we looked at is, how are all of MCE's current customers paying rates, and then applying that same rate structure to the Solano County customer base. And as part of that analysis, much like all the other membership analyses that we've completed thus far, we looked at all of the different ancillary costs that are associated with serving these customers, like data management as currently provided by Calpine, additional call center support, PG&E service fees, and of course, power supply. As part of the revenue and cost analysis, we assumed a 4% reserve target for all revenues generated by the new community, much like is the case for MCE's current process. And then any financial benefits in excess of that allocation to reserves would be available to provide rate savings, program management, and the like. So we looked at what outcomes were available in that regard as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we looked at 2 years as part of this analysis. One was the first year of enrollment, which would be a partial year of service. And then that second column would be the first full year of service comprising the 2021-22 fiscal year for MCE. You can see there at the top, we start with the volume that's assumed to be served. And of course, the difference in the first year versus the second year is that truncated service period starting in April and continuing through December in the first year, and then of course the full 12 months in year 2. Revenues, of course, increase with the extended period of service from year 1 to year 2. But power costs are also assumed to increase based on forward price curve projections related to buying power for those additional customers. Moving down the line, billing and other costs, you can see there the cost of service in year 1 is a bit higher in that regard relative to year 2. And the reason being there is for the customer notifications that are required post-enrollment. And so that really represents the difference in those two numbers year over year. You can see the total cost, of course, is the sum of the parts. The targeted reserve contribution is also entered there beneath total cost. And then, of course, the fiscal benefit is the net effect after taking into consideration revenues, costs, and reserve contributions. And you can see that ranges from about $1.4 million in year 1 to $1 million in year 2, representing about 0.4 and 0.3% of MCE's total revenues as they stand right now. And of course, that savings, even though it isn't particularly large, could be returned to customers in the form of a rate benefit or could be accrued as additional reserves available for programs and the like. So I think those are important things to consider there. If we move on to the next slide, this is just a little highlight of some of the sensitivities that were looked at as part of this analysis. I think it's important to consider as part of any expansion what might happen, what peculiarities might exist in the marketplace. Of course, the electric utility industry can be a little bit volatile from time to time, and so we want to take account for that when we consider the numbers. Please note that there is, that should reflect the 2021-2022 fiscal year, and you'll notice that if you carry the $1,019,384 revenue surplus or fiscal benefit up to the previous slide, those numbers will match. I apologize for that typo there. In the event that power costs were to increase by 20%, you can see how that number would drop to just over $780,000. Looking at an alternative scenario in which fewer customers chose to participate, so in this case, a 75% participation rate, also known as the 25% opt-out rate, that $1 million would drop down to about $850,000. And if both of those situations, say, took effect at the same time, we'd be looking at about a 35% reduction in that $1 million surplus there. So it's also important to note, when you look at these sensitivities, they have a funny way of interplaying with one another. And you can reasonably assume that if participation rates go down, you don't have to buy power for those customers. So even if the market price of power went up, if your participation rate went down, you'd have a partial offset in that particular effect. And that's, so, it's not really the sum of the parts. It's kind of a partial summing there. So anyway, that's a look at the sensitivities that were completed as part of this process. In terms of the renewable energy impacts, if we can go to the next slide, please. We'd be looking at supplying up to, depending on participation, about 116,000 additional megawatt hours of renewable energy to Solano County. And that would result in an incremental 48,000 plus megawatt hours of renewable energy above and beyond the state mandate that otherwise applies. So quite a big difference, generally speaking. And then moving on to greenhouse gas emissions, which is really the last of the three key metrics that we looked at as part of this analysis. You can see here that we and it's in the parentheticals on the different line items here, that we looked at 2017. 2017, as you may recall, was a very good year for MCE in terms of the emission rate. It was very low, almost 90% GHG free in 2017. And so we pegged that because it was pretty much similar to where we're going in the future. In 2019, we now have established a 90% GHG emission free rate. So we applied that here, and that would result in a projected savings relative to PG&E of about 76 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour, translating into about 187,000 pounds of CO2 per year, and 14 million pounds of CO2 per year based on annual energy usage of around 187,000 megawatt hours. So again, there would be surplus, there would be additional renewable energy supply, and there would be additional GHG emissions reductions as a result of the power supply portfolio provided to these customers. And if we go to the last slide, that's kind of reiterating what I just mentioned, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I guess before I take questions, I'll just note that there is a narrative of the applicant analysis that was completed for Solano County that you should have. I know there were a couple of tweaks relatively last minute to this analysis, so if you happen to notice a couple of minor differences in the numbers, we'd be happy to get you out a new copy of this. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Kirby and Alex. Any questions from the board or comments on this issue? Everybody's still looking at their documents, I think. Well, Kirby, looking at the amount of energy used in the agricultural and pumping sector, it looks like there may be opportunities for our energy efficiency programs to have an impact in agriculture in Solano. That's certainly something in past years we've talked about really pushing in Marin County, and it's nice potentially to have more ag that we could go after in terms of energy efficiency.
Absolutely, and I think with the ag loads in particular, there are some interesting conversations waiting to be had around the topic of demand response, and in particular with some of the pump loads that these ag customers may have, to the extent that they have flexibility in when they choose to pump their water, then we may be able to work with them in that regard as well.
Absolutely, good point.
Elizabeth Patterson, there are a couple things. First of all, I have to say I'm absolutely thrilled with this opportunity. It's been a long time in coming. I will add that Benicia is the trendsetter in Solano County. Not only were we a capital at one time for a total of 13 months, I do have a couple of other observations to make. You might have noticed all those wind turbines out on Montezuma Hills. That's all Solano County. All of that belongs to SMUD. None of that belongs in Solano County. One of the consequences of the wind turbines is that Travis Air Force Base had petitioned and succeeded in getting the county to take a resolution to limit the number of wind turbines because they interfere with the reading for the planes through various techniques. It's particularly bad for radar. So I know technology is on the way to resolve that because there are more sophisticated techniques now for locating airplanes in the air. And the last thing is that there is a huge commitment to agriculture in Solano County. We're very proud that we consider ourselves a city-centered county, which is why you have all this ag land. And because of that, it also limits where the solar panels are located, because you don't want to sacrifice some of the finest soils in the state of California for solar arrays. Counter that with the fact that we have huge amount of manufacturing and materials. That means we have existing structures that can easily handle that kind of solar generation. and feed tariffs. So I'm really looking forward to those opportunities. I hope the rest of the board is as excited as I am. It's a tough county. I almost fell out of my chair when they voted unanimously. So one question I have is, I should know the answer to this, and I don't. Is Travis in the county, or is that city of Fairfield?
You know, that's a good question, but I'm assuming that that's probably a direct access customer. That's a guess. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that we do, when we're doing these types of analyses, we do get customer information, but we're not allowed to share any customer information publicly. So we can't even answer that, even if we did.
Yeah, just imagine how much energy is consumed out there. Yeah. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say is, again, I'm just really thrilled with this. I think it's a wonderful step for the county, and there's only one way, and that's up.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your enthusiasm. And just think, biodigesters for that ag sector out there. We can really make a big difference. Any other questions or comments? Yes, please.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If there's somebody in Marion, I didn't want to step on that, but so if there's somebody else who wants to speak first, that's fine.
There is someone here in Marin who would like to speak.
I'd be happy to wait. It's fine.
Okay. I just look at this strategically, and I read from the staff report that we're having communications with some of the larger cities in Solano. You look on the map, this is an obvious place to move into, to surround Sonoma now on 3 sides, whereas only now we have 2. So Sonoma. So I think it's a great idea, and assuming that we can, provided we can serve these people, and we think going forward we can serve the other cities who I think are going to fall in line. This makes a lot of sense for MCE as an entity. So I support this very much. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Kevin?
That actually overlapped my question to some extent. This is Kevin Haroff in Larkspur. First of all, I think it's great that Benicia has led the way in Solano County and has set an example for the unincorporated portions of the county. But again, following on the question that was just asked, or the comment that was just made, and I noted that there have been discussions with the city of Vallejo in the past. So my question is, what are the realistic prospects that we will be seeing additional discussions with Vallejo and other cities within Solano County now that they are surrounded by the rest of unincorporated Solano County, to actually start bringing those much larger population areas, which much more significant impacts on our operations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can answer that, and Alex may want to chime in if I miss anything. We have had some preliminary discussions with some of the larger cities in Solano County, and we expect to be in contact with them more in the next year. I think that because our focus at MCE really for the first half of the calendar year was on the enrollment in our newest communities. We really wanted to do a good job on that. We were kind of holding ourselves back from reaching out to other communities until that enrollment was really complete. And given the CPUC constraints around timing, that left a pretty small window for communities to engage with us in Solano County. There was also some contact with some of the cities in Contra Costa County that haven't yet joined. But there was a very limited time frame to have those conversations before the end of the calendar year, and Solano County was the only community really eager to move forward quickly. But I do expect that during the course of next year, we'll be having some additional conversations. And Alex has done a great job of laying out a time frame for next year that creates an inclusion period that wraps up in around June. So it gives those communities plenty of time between now and June to have discussions, and then gives MCE plenty of time to do the analysis and have our board discussions about whether we want to include additional communities. Of course, any communities that join next year would not be able to be served until 2021. Do you want to add anything to that, Alex? Okay.
Hey,
I just want to say thank you for that. I just asked the question because it's an obvious one. And, given the much greater population densities in the cities, we may be anticipating, a fairly significant impact on our service area and our operations.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this item? So it looks as if you need three things. Is that right? Approval of the resolution approving the County of Solano as a member of MCE. Second is an amendment number 13 to the MCE JPA agreement. And third is direction to submit an amendment number 6 to MCE's implementation plan and statement of interest to the CPUC. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Those are the three actions that are needed.
Okay, and I'd entertain a motion if somebody would like to move those three items.
I'd like to move.
I would move the staff recommendation.
Yeah, that's fine.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, that's approved. Okay, so let's move on to item 11, which is an update on our integrated resource plan. Lindsay has been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Director Sears. It's nice to see everyone tonight. So Kirby sort of breezed over a decision that was made in our October 8th technical committee regarding the MCE's future renewable and carbon-free targets. And this decision is an important one, and we wanted to make sure that the broader board was aware of it. And Kirby's going to be providing some more important analysis that supported the decision that was made during that technical committee. Before we get too far along into that policy decision, I did want to provide a brief update to the board on our 2019 Integrated Resource Plan. So I'll start with that. And also, I'll talk briefly about closing out our 2018 open season. Since we discussed many of MCE's large achievements over the past year during the board retreat, I won't go into that in too much detail. What I'll do is sort of describe what changed from MCE's 2018 IRP to the 2019 IRP. So one important change was that we provided a new note to the reader, which explains the difference between MCE's integrated resource plan that we've been doing for a number of years now versus a proceeding that's going on at the CPUC under the same name, an integrated resource plan, and describe the differences between MCE's process and IRP and the CPUC IRP. And some of the challenges with the CPUC process. In that note to the reader, we encourage the readers to continue using MCE's IRP as a basis for understanding MCE's future resource planning and procurement. Another thing we wanted to highlight is that we continue to update our contracting targets, taking into account MCE's expansion into Contra Costa County, which balances our long-term and short-term procurement. Starting in 2019, MCE does not have any more product content category 3 RECs in our portfolio. We've also further incorporated load-modifying customer behaviors, such as net energy metering and energy storage adoption in MCE's service area. And we are furthering to forecast increased customer demand due to uptake in electric vehicles. We also highlighted MCE's first energy storage request for offer that took place this year. And sort of moving into the second item I wanted to highlight, I wanted to let the board know that MCE has not selected any offers that were bid into the energy storage component of our open season. We did not find any value propositions that made sense for us this year. One other note related to that is that the Delta Ranch project that has been brought to some committees is also no longer under further consideration at this time due to some of the regulatory and rate challenges in our near term. But the developer may bring that project to MCE at a later date. So moving back to the policy discussion, this was something that was born out of a a previous discussion during technical committee in which Kirby was providing a presentation that looked at the comparison of MCE's carbon-free content and PG&E's increasing carbon-free content simply due to the fact that they're losing load. And there was an expressed desire by that committee to make sure that MCE continues to be competitive with PG&E's carbon-free content. So we worked on an analysis to see what impact there might be to MCE if we were to advance MCE's carbon-free content. And so this is something Kirby helped us do some great analysis on, and he's going to present that right now.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Great, thank you. So perfect, we've got the slide up, ready to roll. As Lindsay mentioned, this is an item that was recently discussed and subsequently approved at a technical committee meeting. And so for those of you on the committee, I would encourage you to chime in with anything that you'd like to add or anything that you feel I missed based on our prior discussion. But we'll go ahead and walk you through the various bits of information that were considered as part of this discussion and some of the analytics that surrounded the decision to move forward in transitioning MCE's GHG-free targets a bit ahead of schedule. And so starting at the top here, this is a reminder of the way that our clean energy targets are currently reflected in the adopted integrated resource plan that's in place right now. So you can see 2018 out through 2025 and the transition that eventually gets us to 80% renewable and 100% GHG free in 2025. As Lindsay also mentioned, we've gone through the process of kind of annually and even sometimes more frequently than that, evaluating what we believe to be impacts to PG&E's retail sales base as a result of CCA implementation and expansion, and trying to get a handle on what that means in terms of transitions in PG&E's clean energy portfolio. And what we've seen over time is that as CCAs form and expand, it has the effect of basically cleaning PG&E's portfolio because it takes some time to divest renewable energy assets and volumes, which they are in the process of doing now, but it typically occurs at a slower pace than their sales erode. And they also have assets, particularly their hydroelectric facilities and nuclear facilities, that really don't change in terms of their operating characteristics year over year, but for hydrological conditions in the case of the hydro assets. And so we've noticed this transition over time, and with the launch of so many CCAs occurring recently and in the not too distant future, we decided to take a look at what this might mean for MCE in terms of where its targets are set now and where they might want to evolve based on those observations. It's also noteworthy here that we've really consistently exceeded our clean energy targets, so there's obviously momentum and interest by this organization in pushing the envelope as fast as it reasonably can, subject to rate-related considerations and product availability. So this is really part of this organization's DNA, or so it seems. So what we did as part of looking at this transition is considered where we are now, where the market's going, where California is really going, at least Northern California, in terms of PG&E supply portfolio and how it is that we might want to adapt ourselves moving forward. So just as a reminder on the next slide, this is a piece of an analysis that was previously presented to the board as well as the technical committee. It's really just a snippet of that analysis, and it shows with the yellow shaded bar charts what we expect to see in terms of increasing CCA sales over time. And then the line that's charted here is what we foresee being the trend in PG&E's emission rate that will correspond with those increases in CCA sales. And it's noteworthy here that the actual data points reflected in this particular graph are related to the 2015 and 2016 calendar years. All other years, as they relate to both CCA sales and PG&E's emission rate, are projections. But we think we've got a pretty good handle on where things are going, and this does reflect a bit of conservatism in the sense that if everything kind of fell into place as it could, this would really be how things would likely track over time. So in terms of the transition that was considered, we'll go on to the next slide here. We looked at, in this particular matrix, you'll see the current GHG-free target in the top line, and then in the second line, the expedited GHG-free target and how those relate to one another. And the change that was considered was moving MCE's GHG-free target up essentially 3 to 4 years, where we'd hit 90% GHG-free by 2019 and get to 100% by 2022. So that, I think, really puts this organization where it wants to be well ahead of schedule. And in looking at these changes, we believe that they can actually be achieved with some related cost reductions. Now, in order to do that, it's noteworthy that we would need to reframe some of the renewable energy goals, which of course are a subset of the overall GHG-free targets that this organization has. And we'll talk about that in just a second on the next slide. So this is kind of carving through the layers a bit. The first layer that we looked at was the overall GHG-free content, and what we're talking about here are the specific transitions that would occur amongst the different products that MCE purchases that make up that clean energy content. And as part of this transition in going to 100% carbon-free by 2022, we'd be looking at level setting MCE's renewable content at 60%, starting in 2019 through 2022, and then ticking up to 70% by 2030 thereafter. So staying ahead of the statewide mandate that applies to all retail sellers. And you can see as you look down through the various lines that are reflected here for the 4-year period, for that 4-year transition period, that we'd be looking at laying flat our overall renewable energy target, and then as subsets of that overall renewable energy target, we'd be looking at setting our bucket 1, which is, if you recall, generally in-state renewable energy purchases or power that's produced by out-of-state renewable generators that's directly imported into the state. That would make up 70% of that overall renewable energy target. And then the balance, the remaining 30%, would be comprised of bucket 2 renewable energy products. And so, if you have any questions about the distinctions between those products, happy to answer. But that would make up the composition of the overall 60% renewable energy goal. Of course, you can see, as Lindsay mentioned, that we'd be looking at zeroing out unbundled renewable energy certificate purchases, or bucket 3 product purchases in this case. And then the very bottom line item is really an offset. So if you refer back up to those top 2 lines, this additional carbon-free product that would be purchased here as reflected in the bottom line is really making up the difference in that adjustment to the overall renewable energy target. So that's really kind of how the renewable energy piece plays into the overall carbon-free piece as part of this transition. So again, 60% renewable, 90% GHG-free starting in 2019, transitioning to 100% GHG-free in 2022. That 60% renewable would remain fixed for 2019 through 2022, and then step up to 70% by 2030 ahead of the statewide mandate. All right, so moving on to the next slide. This gets a little bit more into the numbers, and there are some appendices here at the end, and I would encourage you to look at them and ask questions about them if you'd like to dive into the detail a little bit more. But the gist of this transition in holding this renewable content fixed at 60% while stepping up the overall carbon-free content to 90%, moving towards 100%, would be a $5 million savings over that 4-year transition period, specifically related to that transition. In addition to that cost savings, we also discussed with the technical committee a change in our overall planning methodology, which was really using some very conservative approaches up until now and even currently that were intended to protect against potential shortfalls in our renewable content and overall carbon-free content so that we would maintain that competitive advantage that we wanted to preserve relative to PG&E's supply portfolio. But what that's really resulted in over time is significantly exceeding our targets, which on the one hand seems like a very good thing. On the other hand, it does result in quite a few additional dollars spent on clean energy relative to where we could have been. And so we reconsidered that process and realized that we could save an additional approximate $9.5 million over that 4-year transition period by looking at doing things a little more, I guess, just being a little tighter, if you will, on how it is that we're quantifying the renewable energy purchases that we intend to make. So if you look at those numbers together, that's about $14.5 million over a 4-year period that we project we could save by affecting these different transitions. And so moving on to the last non-appendix related slide here, I think this just recaptures the message that's already been delivered related to the integrated resource plan and how these transitions will be memorialized therein. I think I've said it several times already, so I'll spare you having to hear me say it again regarding the different transitions related to renewable energy and overall carbon-free content. And I think Lindsay also pointed out that the revised or updated integrated resource plan will be scheduled for discussion and approval with the technical committee on November 1st, and that it will be released as the 2019 integrated resource plan. Happy to answer any questions or including questions that you may have on the 2 appendices there at the end, which get into a little bit more detail regarding the numbers.
Great. Thanks very much, Kirby. And we did have a robust conversation about this at TechCom, but I know that there are many people here tonight who were not on that committee. So if anyone has comments or questions, let me know. Barbara Kohler. Yeah.
So this is Barbara Kohler from Fairfax. So I know we're looking at carbon-free, increasing that, but it looks like comparing to our old renewable energy targets, we've changed those considerably because originally we were going to be at 80% by 2025. Now at 2030, we'll get to 70%. And so that was a little confusing to me because I thought our goal was to be as high as possible on renewable, not necessarily carbon-free, which refresh my memory. Is carbon-free mostly large hydro? What else is involved in carbon-free?
Yeah, for purposes of this discussion and for purposes of MCE's resource planning efforts, non-renewable carbon-free would be large hydroelectric generation.
Okay, thank you.
And this is Don Tatson. I just want to say thank you for incorporating this so quickly. And as I recall, our discussion was in part that, at least I felt that from a customer standpoint, they join MCE in order to get greener energy, competitive or lower rates, and they want the power to come on. And what you've done is give us greater assurance that we can deliver all those things to our customers.
Yeah, thank you for making that observation, because I think amongst various resource planning considerations and an interest in expediting the overall carbon-free content delivered to our customers, I think in light of the various evolutions in the PCIA that have gone on and various other rate-related concerns that continue to be at the forefront of MCE's planning considerations, this was very much wrapped up in this process as well, just trying to be as efficient as we can, not only in getting to our environmental benchmarks, but also in delivering a cost-competitive product to our customers. And so the savings that we anticipate being able to coax out as part of this transition was also very much considered as part of this process, and thank you for that reminder.
Thank you, Don. Any other comments or questions?
Okay, just one.
Oh, yes, please, Kevin.
Thanks for that presentation. I did see it before, and seeing it twice is helpful because it's very complicated. I just wanted to highlight one thing you did mention during your presentation, and it's in the materials, which is the essentially the elimination of bucket 3 resources, starting in 2019. Yeah, so after December next year. So I think that's a minor thing in some respects, but it's actually historically kind of significant because during especially the initial years that I was a member of this board, we did receive there was a lot of controversy over our reliance on that category of resource. And I would get questions from people all over the community. Why are you doing that? That's just, that's just paper energy. It's not real renewable energy. We can now say it's gone, and I think that's a great thing.
Super, thanks, Kevin. Any other comments or questions? This is a discussion item only, so. Yeah, I'm seeing, yep, sorry, Ray. Yes, please.
This is more in the line of a comment. I'm on the technical committee, so I've seen this already, as some others have. The comment is, I just think that we ought to recognize that this level of analysis and this foresight to do this analysis is something that staff and our consultants should be very proud of. This is identifying a long-term trend and figuring out some policy options to address that long-term trend. Often people don't think years down the road, but this is positioning MCE for the 2020s. And I just wanted to make that comment because this is actually, even they seem either fairly basic or when you peel away the layers rather complicated, it's actually very important. It's a thoughtful and important analysis. So I think that should be said.
I thought my microphone was on. I was a challenge to try to top Ray's comment. Nobody in this room is taking it up. Any other comments from anyone in Concord? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, everyone. It's great. And it is good for us on the technical committee to have the opportunity to hear these presentations twice. And particularly since the first time was in the morning, I think I understood it better at that point. So last is, do we have any board member or staff matters before we adjourn? Okay, seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.